Okay, that is about editorial about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's vision, and it's doing no justice to a vision of democracy. Doing no justice to a vision of democracy. Doing no justice to a vision of democracy. The existing economic system pursued by the political parties is antagonistic to the model envisioned by B.R. Ambedkar. Across the globe, like never before, B.R. Ramji Ambedkar's 131st birthday was celebrated in diverse forms to honor him and other anti-caste icons such as Jyotirao Phule. Canada's British Columbia province has declared April as a Dalit History Month. In the federal state of Colorado and Michigan in the United States, it is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's Equity Day. In India, the government of India has erected public institutions to formally celebrate Ambedkar's birthday. The Uttar Pradesh government celebrated this day as a day of social harmony. The Tamil Nadu government has declared it a day of equality. At the same time, attempts are also being made to misappropriate Ambedkar by parties, organizations, and individuals of various ideological persuasions for their own interests without making any effort to embody Ambedkar's principle of socio cultural justice and economic fairness. Celebration needs substance. A critical examination of these celebrations, at least in India, reveals that these are primarily a celebration of Ambedkar's zeal, mainly keeping electoral gains in mind. This may be important, but it does not do justice to Ambedkar's grand emancipatory vision of democracy. Most of the celebrations have not only been oblivious of Ambedkar's anti caste and anti patriarchal vision, but also seem to be deliberately ignoring his world view on economic equality, fairness, and justice. The existing economic system pursued by the political parties at the center and state levels is mostly antagonistic to the model envisioned by Ambedkar. It would be worthy to revisit some of the salient features of his works on economic democracy to draw lessons for today. As Labour Minister, member of the Viceroy's Council 1942 to 1946, and through his writings such as States and Minorities 1947, Ambedkar clearly laid out his vision regarding the substance of political economy. As far back as 1928, Baba Saheb had struggled to get the maternity benefit bill passed in the Bombay Legislative Council. This was later taken up by the Madras Legislative Council in 1934. In 1942, Ambedkar changed the work's time to 8 hours per day from earlier 12 hours. Ironically, the current dispensation during the COVID 19 pandemic wanted to bring back the 12 hours of work a day norm. Recently, a few trade unions had to submit a memorandum to the Bharatiya Janata Party government opposing its plan to change the Factories Act 1948 to reinstate 12 hours of work. In fact, the Uttar Pradesh government in 2020 was forced to roll back 12 hours of work time after labor unions protested and Allahabad High Court issued a notice to the government. The process of massive contractualization and informalization and casualization of laborers since the 1990s has not only widened the economic inequality between employer and employee, but also between high-paid permanent employees on the one hand and the low-paid regular contractual and temporary employees on the other. Contract workers have increased from 15.5% in 2001 to 27.9% in 2015 to 16, even in the organized manufacturing sector. In states such as Bihar, Uttarakhand, and Odisha, a majority of the organized manufacturing workforce is contractual. Despite the prohibition under the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act 1970, contract workers are being paid lower salary wages for the same work. This is a clear violation of the law and Article 141 of the Constitution as observed by the Supreme Court of India in 2016. The Supreme Court overturned the verdict of the Punjab and Haryana High Court that temporary employees of Punjab government were not entitled to equal pay for equal work on par with permanent employees, even among regular workers. According to the periodic labor force survey data, 45% were paid less than 10,000 rupees a month and 72% were paid below 18,000 rupees a month. Only around 3% of regular workers earn between 50,000 rupees to 1 lakh rupees a month, and only 0.2% earn more than 1 lakh rupees a month. The emergence of new classes and new contract contradictions threatens the very democratic existence and secular fabric of this country. Ambedkar was clear that a continued existence of glaring inequalities and the tyranny of majority will sound the death knell of Indian democracy. Adhering to the principles, it is worth recalling here that Ambedkar not only established equal pay for equal work irrespective of gender as a member of the Viceroy's Council, but also included this as a part of directive principles in the Indian Constitution. However, women still continue to receive on average between 70 rupees to 90 rupees a day less than men as both formal and informal workers. Imagine that would be what would have been the stand of Ambedkar regarding this had he had regarding this had he been alive. He would have been equally shocked to see the huge pay gap between formal and informal sector workers. Informal workers constitute 93% of formal and informal sector workforce in India. Some recent estimates suggest that informal sector workers on average continue to get 30% to 40% of the real daily wage of formal workers. The four labor codes on wages, social security, occupational safety, and industrial relations, which were brought in by the BJP government after consolidating 44 labor laws, are going to worsen the situation of workers. Workers in the unorganized sector organized a protest in April 2022 in Tamil Nadu, urging the state government to pass a resolution in the state assembly demanding that the central government withdraw the four labor codes. One of these codes, Industrial Relations Code 2020 (IRC), directly infringes upon the right to strike, which was recognized by Ambedkar as one of the fundamental rights of workers. This was the reason the Indian Trade Unions Amendment Bill was passed in 1943 with the effort of Ambedkar, which he had made a recognition of trade unions compulsory. There were many other contributions of Ambedkar in institutionalizing laws related to workers' insurance, minimum wages, workers' welfare, etc., many of which the four labor codes seek to circumvent to reverse surreptitiously. Therefore, it is high time to stand by the ideals of the architect of the Constitution, Ambedkar's vision. It is imperative to understand the main reasons behind Ambedkar's active interest in economic and labor rights. First, he strongly argued for simultaneously addressing substantive questions of political, social, and economic democracy because they are intertwined with each other in a way that leaving out one will jeopardize the progress made in another. Second, he was as much a believer in economic justice as in social justice. This becomes clear when we go through his work, States and Minorities. This document not only contained extensive safeguards for the emancipation of the scheduled caste but also laid out his vision of social, cultural justice and economic fairness. He had argued for nationalization of key and basic industries, the agriculture and insurance sectors. He wanted the state to allocate agricultural land only on tendency basis to people irrespective of caste, class, and creed for collective farming. This vision was obviously against whatever is being done in the country in the post-liberalization period and greatly intensified in the last decade or so. The ongoing monetization, sell off, privatization of airports, the Indian Railways, Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited, Telephone Nigam Limited, MTNL, and the Life Insurance Corporation of India, LIC, public sector banks, and other public sector organizations are grave assaults on economic democracy. It is not without reason that labor was placed under the concurrent list in the Indian Constitution. Further, the Labor Investigation Committee and Labor Commissioners were instituted by Baba Sahib to ameliorate the condition of workers as much as possible within the existing law. Hence, the union and state governments must take the lead in not only stalling the privatization spree and undertake necessary measures to get the four labor codes repealed, but also to take proactive measures to follow the triad vision of democracy, social, economic, and political, adhering to political if they want to celebrate the Baba Sahib in the true sense. Without adhering to Ambedkar's ideals and merely appropriating the icon is just another pretext to divert people's attention from everyday materiality. Dr. Ambedkar was dead against hero worship or bhakti in politics, which he thought was a sure path to degradation of democracy and eventual dictatorship. Next is disability and the barriers to feminine hygiene. Economic and structural factors create more hurdles to hygiene management, good health seeking behaviors. In the past decade, significant progress has been made in India by government and non-governmental actors with regard to menstrual health and hygiene management. Increased awareness about MHHM, enhanced access to female friendly, gender appropriate sanitation facilities, and availability of menstrual products, in particular sanitary pads, are some of the visible outcomes of this progress. However, certain groups have been overlooked this thus far, including girls and women with disabilities who face an exceptional burden on account of the intersections between gender and disability. Census data at SAMBIT, according to Census 2011, nearly 27 million persons, or 22.2% of the Indian population, are disabled. The Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 specifies that a person with disabilities had long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment which interaction with barriers hinders his full effective participation in society equally with others. Persons with disability are unable to fully participate in many areas of daily life or may be excluded from doing so as a consequence of impairments, societal barriers, or socio-cultural attitudes, magnified vulnerabilities. The 2016 Act, while stipulating the rights and entitlements of persons with disability, recognizes that women and children are particularly vulnerable and that certain rights, such as reproductive rights, may be even more neglected or disregarded as compared to others. Despite the intent of the Act and its provisions, the realization of rights and entitlements of persons with disability is poor, especially for those from socially and economically vulnerable groups. In India, girls and women with disabilities from poor households and marginalized communities bear a triple burden that exacerbates their vulnerabilities. Deeply embedded prejudice and misconceptions about the reproductive anatomy and abilities of persons with disability result in their being considered asexual, unsuitable for marriage, and incapable of having and raising children. Its access to sexual and reproductive health information and services are in turn compromised because of these social and physical barriers. Several studies bear testimony to this and reveal that persons with disability are more likely to be denied information about sexual and reproductive health as compared to those without disabilities. Field experiences reveal compromised menstrual health, a basic physiological aspect of sexual and reproductive health among persons with disability. For a vast majority of women, girls, and persons with gender diverse identities, menstruation is more than a mere physiological process due to preconceived notions about menstruators and menstrual blood being impure or dirty. Economic and structural factors create additional hurdles to hygiene management, good health, and health seeking behaviors. Constraints imposed by limited mobility, cognitive capacities, and self care pose even greater challenges for girls and women with disabilities. Collaboration for solutions. The United Nations Population Fund and Water Aid India are working together to understand the key challenges and constraints faced by persons with disability with regard to menstrual health and hygiene. The aim is to identify simple and potentially scalable solutions based on insights from individuals and organizations working with persons with disability across the country. There are critical areas for improving the menstrual health of persons with disability that have emerged. These include accessible and adaptable information, education, and communication on menstrual health and hygiene for persons with disability based on their differential needs and capacities, and an enabling socio-cultural environment. For example, while the core messages related to menstruation and menstrual hygiene are the same for all, the manner in which information is communicated will vary depending on the type of disability and extent of impairment. Tactile models accompanied by audio explanations can help people with visual impairment, whereas the same models accompanied by materials with clear step-by-step visuals are useful for people with hearing impairments. The second is appropriate and safe menstrual products and hygiene promotions. Fewer than two-thirds of girls and women with disabilities aged between 15 to 24 years used hygienic menstrual protection methods. National Family Health Survey 2019 to 20. Thus, persons with disability and caregivers need to be educated on the diverse range of products available to enable them to choose the most appropriate product. Persons with intellectual impairments are highly sensitive to materials and may acquire those that are soft to touch and cause less irritation. Persons with mobility restrictions require products that can be worn for longer, as changing them frequently poses a challenge. The third is responsive and inclusive water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities, including disposal solutions in different settings. Accessible designs of vast infrastructure for diverse needs exist and have been created in rural and urban contexts in India, and particularly in schools, but need to be scaled up for wider coverage. The fourth is caregivers, both from within the family and institutions, are vital for disability focused interventions and must be included as both participants and partners. For a policy perspective, there is a need to incorporate a disability inclusive approach within the industrial health and hygiene work in the country, and to implement specific disability focused interventions to facilitate inclusion. It is a right. Every menstruating person has the right to menstrual health irrespective of their gender identity, ability, or socio-economic status. While India has made significant progress busting stigmas around menstrual health and income and expanding access to hygiene products, let us not leave anyone behind. Let us raise the bar to ensure that all menstruating persons, able or differently abled, enjoy the same dignity and rights every month of the year. V.K. Madhavan is Chief Executive, WaterAid India, Henry Ojwa in UNFPA, India Representative and Country Director, Bhutan. Now go to letters to the editor. The school shooting, the gruesome gunning down of several children of school in Texas is a rude shock. Even though the exact reason is still unknown, the incident should be an eye opener. The possession of guns by individuals, irrespective of age, is asking for trouble. At this time, the US government proclaims a law banning the possession of guns without any valid purpose. Chennai, the killing of innocent children makes one's heart palpitate. That people are so helpless in bringing in stricter gun control rules makes the right to life purposeless. When the US Supreme Court speaks so eloquently about the rights of unborn children, what about those of living children? Who's to speak for them? Is the gun lobby so powerful? Are we in a civilized state? The murder of many innocent school children is it's horrible. Hatred created by vengeance and violence has no place on earth. The US seems to be paying a heavy price for lax gun control. It has been said that the root cause of the gunman to go on a shooting spree is humiliation from peers. Due to some deficiencies, the accumulation of humiliation results in alienation. When alienation is not recognized by teachers and parents, it morphs into rage. Rage then needs an outlet to express itself. Perhaps schools and parents need to communicate frequently and more meaningfully. What we need is humiliation management, alienation management, and rage management. The Quad and India. From the Indian perspective, its participation in the Quad summit in Japan was an opportunity to showcase to all its Asian neighbors that India can respond strongly when it comes to ensuring geopolitical stability. Regular summits between the four Quad countries can help build a solid foundation for a new principle based multilateral world order. A.G. Palarivelan is now free. While one would not be beggared by him is a smile, the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister meeting him was a confusing signal. One can only suppose that the gesture was more in celebration of having reasserted the rights of the state, which is the governor. In the flash of that victory, the sensitivities of the TN government's political ally seem to have been forgotten. The only tops there is more sobriety if and when the other convicted conspirators are released. Conviction and repression. There is a risk of inflamed separatist passions in Kashmir following Yasin Malik's conviction after pleading guilty to all charges related to a terror funding case, including those under the Stringent Unlawful Activities Prevention Act (WAPA). It was inevitable that the separatist leaders, Yasin Malik, chairman of the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, would be sentenced to life imprisonment as he was by an NIA court. Malik's checkered past includes serious charges of being involved in the killing of Indian Air Force officers in 1990. It is another matter if Malik, who claims to have abjured violence and has been part of several players with the Indian government in peace talks since the mid 1990s, was pleading guilty to all charges in order to make a political statement and to inflame passions to get support for the flagging separatist leadership in the Kashmir Valley. Nevertheless, with the Union government adopting a hard line since 2019 dealing with the separatist movement, it was foregone conclusion that the charges against Malik would have been doggedly pursued. Among the separatists, the JKLF remains an output committee to the independence of Kashmir, including parts of Pakistan occupied Kashmir, placing it on a confrontationist course with the Indian government, notwithstanding Malik's claims of giving up violence as it means. The initial reaction of the Valley to Malik's conviction was an uptick in violence and protest, even as security clampdowns were put in place to prevent any further post upsurge. Malik's arrest and and conviction, the ongoing house arrest of Mirwais Umar Farooq, and the death of hardliner Syed Ali Shah Gilani suggest that the political face of the separatism has been neutralized in the valley. Yet, this does not mean that the voices of separatism in the valley have been silenced. Militant incidents with law enforcement, security personnel, and even Kashmiri Pandits as targets have continued to rage on, and the absence of political leadership is expected to give way to more militancy. This is a situation that should not be taken lightly, with the mainstream Kashmir polity also nursing a grievance of alienation over the Indian government's decisions to do away with the special status for Jammu and Kashmir, its bifurcation into two union territories, and loss of statehood. Besides the ham-handed approach to a active politically suitable delimitation of electoral constituencies, the situation in the valley threatens to return to what prevailed during the violent 1990s. It is possible that Yasin Malik conviction, even if obtained through the judicial process, will be seen in the valley as an extension of the political repression that has been unleashed since 2019, and militant groups will definitely seek to portray it that way. It is up to the union government to resuscitate confidence building measures in the Union Territory. Return to statehood and reactivation of the democratic political process is much needed imperative. Sex as work laws should free consenting sex workers from stigma and grant them rights. A long standing demand for sex workers that their work be decriminalized has been partially fulfilled with the Supreme Court passing an order on May 19 that adult sex workers are entitled to dignity and equal protection under law, directing the police to respect the rights of consenting sex workers. The court observed that notwithstanding the profession, every individual has a right to a dignified life under Article 21 of the Constitution. It reiterated that what the court had ruled, the Buddhadev Karmaskar, that sex workers are also entitled to a life of dignity, with the Trafficking of Persons Prevention, Protection and Rehabilitation Bill yet to see the light of the day. The court invoked powers under Article 142 to issue guidelines till the legislation is in force. In 2011, it had set up a panel to look at prevention of trafficking, rehabilitation, and conditions conducive for sex workers who is to continue work. As the court awaits the government's response to the panel's recommendation that adult sex workers should not be arrested or penalized or harassed or victimized, the three-judge bench led by Justice L. Nageshwar did well to direct the police to treat all sex workers with dignity and should not abuse them verbally and physically, subject them to violence or coerce them into any sexual activity. During the hearings, the Additional Solicitor General Jayant Sood had conveyed to the court that the government has certain reservations on some of the panel's recommendations. The court has asked the government to respond to the panel's suggestions in 6 weeks. By holding that basic protection of human decency and dignity extends to sex workers and their children, the court has struck a blow for the rights of an exploited vulnerable section. Coming down heavily on the brutal and violent attitude of the police towards sex workers, the court said it is as if they are class whose rights are not recognized. It has asked state government to do a survey of protective homes under the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act. The legislation governs sex work in India to review the cases of adult women detained there and process their release in a time-bound manner. The ITP Act penalizes acts such as running a brothel, soliciting in public place, living off the earnings of sex worker, and living with or habitually being in the company of one. The court's general observation should help sensitize the police, media, and society towards sex workers who have generally been invisible and voiceless. The ball is in the government's court to draw up appropriate legislation to free consenting sex workers from stigma and grant them workers' rights. In that too, the court suggested the center and states involve sex workers or their representatives to reform laws. Okay, is about in Sioni, the blood trail of lynching. After two Adivasi men were lynched in Madhya Pradesh by cow vigilantes, allegedly belonging to the Sriram Sena and Bajrang Dal, the state government constituted a special investigation team to probe the case. Subbomoy Sikdar reports on the incident that has led to the climate of fear in the district. Here, Pulvati breaks down when she speaks of her husband Dansa Invati, who was killed by a mob earlier this month. I kept pleading with them to at least tell me where they were taking him and to show me the cow meat that he had been accused of possessing. But what I received instead were blows and abuses, she says. On the night of May 2 to 3, Pulvati and Dansa had been fast asleep outside their Kacha house in Simaria village in the Kurai block of Sion district in Madhya Pradesh. It was then when she heard thudding sounds that Pulvati woke up to see a group of men assaulting her husband. Their elder son Jaiprakash, who lives next door, also rushed out. On hearing the commotion, he prayed with the mob to let Dansa go, but the men paid no heed. Threats from the mob forced Pulvati and Jaiprakash to retreat to their homes. The men took Dansa away. Pulvati and her son are unsure of how old he was. They reckon he was upwards of 50. Dansa, a part-time farmer and casual laborer, was one of the two Adivasi men who were lynched during the early hours of May 3. The other, Sampath Lalvati, at 52, lived in the neighboring village of Sagar, also Sion district, and around 400 kilometers from Bhopal. The state capital, Sampath Lal's family, who were not at home at the time of the incident, say they heard that he went to Simaria upon hearing of assault taking place there and also became victim of the mob. So far, 14 men have been arrested in the case. GSUK was in charge of the Kurai police station under whose jurisdiction the two villages fall, had alleged that the attackers belonged to the Bajrang Dal and Sriram Sena. The families of the two men have also made the same claim. Denying the allegations, the Madhya Pradesh government transferred Huki and all the officers of the police station and formed a special investigation team to conduct the probe. Even as investigations go on, the residents of the village fear for their lives. A night of terror, eyewitnesses of the assault, including Brijesh Vatti, who woke up on hearing the noise outside his house, says the incident took place between 2:30 a.m. to 3 a.m. Rushing out, they saw 15 to 20 men hitting Dansa and Sampath Lal with sticks and batons while accusing them of possessing a beef. The mob demanded to know the names of the other responsible for killing the cow. They wanted to take Dansa, Sampath Lal, and Brijesh, who was also assaulted but survived the attack, to the Badalpur police post nearby. By the time the police arrived and seized a bag of meat from the spot, and that the mob claimed had been in Dansa and Sampath Lal's possession, they took the three injured men to the Kurai government hospital. Dansa succumbed to his injuries, and at around 6 a.m. Sampath Lal died off an hour later. Sagar village is a 13-minute walk from the Invati household. Matibai Vatti, Sampath Lal's wife, lives with her mother-in-law, Bashiana Bai, and two daughters, Seema and Sonal. Unlike Pulvati, Madhubai did not get a glimpse of her husband just before he died. My daughters and I had gone for wedding while my mother-in-law had gone for another. She says my husband stayed back took care of the house. I then heard from people that he had gone to Simraya village. I later saw a video in which he was being tortured by a mob. Those men were forcefully trying to extract a confession from him. It was an unbearable sight. Following the incident, CCTV camera has been installed outside Dansa's mud house in Simaria. Pulvati lives alone following his husband's death. The house has a modest kitchen and a storeroom for forest produce. It does not have power supply. Goats sometimes Sondrin in Jayaprakash lives with his wife and two daughters in a better equipped concrete house next door. Pulvati's younger son Om Prakash is daily wage in Mumbai. He has yet to come home after his father's death, as taking leave for a few days could cost him a job. Economic opportunities are few in the tribal dominated Seonit district, which is largely covered with the forest. Some shops in Seonis town were open as late as noon. There are no major manufacturing activities in the town. The Pench Tiger Reserve provides some jobs in the tourism sector, but the Adivasis in the district mostly till small parcels of land and collect forest produce such as mahua. Since this brings them little income or ends after a season, they also sometimes look for the jobs in the nearby district of Nagpur in Maharashtra. Before he was assaulted by the mob, Dansa had been planning to go to Nagpur. Sampath Lal, on the other hand, had sought work in the big cities and had depended on whether he could find in Sagar or the nearby villages. His family says he was saving up to build a concrete house and organize his 19-year-old daughter Sema's wedding. There are limited opportunities in the village, and the pandemic years made our lives even tougher. All the hard work he did is now of no use. He will never be able to see any of these dreams come true, say Muto. Sampath Lal's mother, Bishana, recalls how he had worked overtime to get a smartphone for Sonal, who needed one to continue her education during the lockdown. Seema had already quit school because he did not have one. For Bishiana, the tragedy is especially devastating as he had lost her other son to tuberculosis just a few years ago. Bridges 26, whose house is a stone's throw and is a stone's throw away from the Invati household, got married about a fortnight before the incident. He had his wife live with his parents, two sisters, and grandmother. Some consider him lucky for having escaped death after being beaten so mercilessly. Bridges is grateful that the villagers saved him that night, but he is fraught with anxiety now. The incident has left a deep impact on me, says. I have not been able to resume work since then. Being the only earning member of family of seven, this cannot be the case forever. Though he wants to go back to his routine, the fear that such an assault may occur again has left him with a sense of dread, he says. The probe. Since Sion district is close to Nagpur, rumors often float around that cattle are smuggled from Madhya Pradesh to Maharashtra to be slaughtered. In both the states, cow slaughter is banned. If anyone is suspected of slaughtering a cow, the burden of proof falls on the accused as per state laws. While Kurai block is used to the murmurs, the recent incident is a first hand has caused great disquiet. The swiftness and sadness with which two of our own were picked up and lynched is shocking. Our village had kept its peace. It is under strain now. Forget violence or co-vigilantism. I had not even seen Bajrang Dal volunteer movements or outreach activities here. And suddenly one night, a bunch of 15 to 20 people come and just beat two men so severely that they don't survive, says Inder Numrate, whose house is about 200 meters from Dansa's house. Her Namrite farmer says that of the 160 odd homes in the villages, 125 are Gond families. The rest of the population consists of people belonging to other backward classes, primarily the Teli and Pal Cash. This is a tribal majority village. If we are not safe here, where else do we go? And how can we take the administration's assurance on face value? He asked. Sevak Ram Dhruve Gond, who lives in Saga, where Sampath Lal lived, echoes these sentiments. He fears retaliation by the 14 men who have been arrested in connection with the lynching incidents so far. If there is no strong message from the administration, they will not fear the law. They can come after any one of us on the pretext of course lottery, says. The way the probe is progressing, it won't take long for them to come out on bail and come back to avenge their incarcerations. And even if they continue to be in custody, others can do the same when the spotlight on these deaths dies down. Dhruv is referring to the stream of visits of administrative officials and politicians after the incident, including of former Madhya Pradesh Chief Minister Kamal Nath of the Congress. The Congress Arjun Singh Kokaide represents the Bargat Reserve Assembly seat in which Samaria and Sagar Fall Nath met the families earlier this week and charged the Bharatiya Janata Party government headed by Shivraj Singh Chauhan of shielding the accused due to the allegation associated with Bajrang Dal and Sriram Sena. Kokudia alleged that the state government formed and sit to investigate the incident after Wiki's statement, and the special team which had been formed before the sit visited the village on May 15. It met the families and briefed them about the sit. I don't know about these technicalities, says Pulvati when asked if the information of the sit came as a reassurance. Jai Prakash says that the local police, which was investigating the matter before the formation of the sit, were also doing a decent job. Apart from Wiki and Congress, the families of the deceased and judges maintained their calm. They claim that the goons belong to the Bajrangi Dal and Sriram Sena, while the Congress won a significant number of reserved seats for the scheduled tribes in the 2018 assembly election. The BJP has made considerable efforts in consolidating its electoral outreach in tribal areas in recent decades. Chauhan has been the flag bearer of cow protection. When he returned to power in 2020, he even announced the formation of the Gau cabinet, refuting the allegations that the accused are associated with the Bajrangi Dal and Sriram Sena. Madhya Pradesh Home Minister Narottam Mishra had said that the initial investigation had found that no members of the Bajrang Dal and Sriram Sena were involved in the attack. Members of the special team have chosen to remain silent on the affiliation of the 14 men arrested so far, and the city had refused to speak to the media. The accused from Seoni. All the men arrested belong to Seoni district. Most of them are in their 20s and 30s. The families and neighbors of the victims have also sought the arrest of Subham Bagal. A video where he repeatedly refers to the two dead men as Gau Kasai, Gau slaughterers, went viral after the incident. In the video, Bagal is seen blaming the police instead of the mob for the deaths of the Adivasis. Since the incident, he has posted videos on Facebook of Sriram Sena activists going to the residence of an accused and taking a vow to save them all. Such brazen display of solidarity with the accused has made us more apprehensive. So the police have provided security to the affected families, but until people like Bagel are arrested, it does not mean anything, says Anshul Markham, a lawyer and social activist from Gawai and Guwari village in Kurai block. Markham, who belongs to the Pradhan tribe, is also the founder member of the state spokesperson of the Jaya Adivasi Yuva Sangam. Bagal was unbelievable for comments. Since there are very few job creation opportunities in Seon district, right-wing groups have allegedly tapped the vast population of unemployed youth in the area to add have to their activities, says Koida. Imagine jobless youngsters who is getting good food to eat, a vehicle to drive around in the whole day, and local authorities and police fearing him. This creates a heady cocktail of power and luxury that the youth get used to. It emboldens them to take the law into their hands. The Vishwa Hindu Parishad, the Mahakoshal division of Sangathan Mantri of Avdesh Pratap Singh, has not tried to distance himself from the accused. The Bajrang Dal is the youth wing of the VHP. But he says Adivasis are not the group's targets. Adivasis are Hindus and follow the Sanatan Dharma. Why would we target them? Those who died were poor. They could not have engaged in beef trading. They have done it for someone else. He says he does not elaborate on who the others are. Responding to this, Markham is the social activist, alleges that the right-wing groups themselves are involved in cattle smuggling. What closure means? The government has announced a compensation of 8 lakh rupees and a job each for the next of the kin of both the deceased Amar Singh Wakad and Gond from Samriya village, who has been associated with many NGOs working for the Adivasis in Seoni. Says the announcements of posting Sampath Lal, daughter Seema is a tribal girls ashram, and Jaiprakash in Vatij as a daily wage earner in a high school Vijayapani were made under the provisions of the Scheduled Castes, Scheduled Tribes Prevention and Atrocities Act of 1989 and the Protection of Civil Rights Act of 1955, but the government should have done much more, he says. Uneducated Adivasis are not aware of their rights, and the families should have got compensation of at least 1 crore rupees, he says. Groups such as the Gondwana Gantraya Party, the Adivasi Adhikari Karmachari Sangh, the Jaya Adivasis Yuva Shakti Sangathan and the Bhima Army have made similar demands. On May 9, they came together to stage one of the biggest protests in Seoni's history. It was attended by thousands of Adivasis from Seoni and nearby districts, while investigations are ongoing and political parties make allegations and counter allegations. Pulvati and Jayaprakash bring up a buzzword that has gained currency in the Hindi heartland in recent months to describe what closure means to them. We want the houses of the attackers razed to the ground. After all, this is what we have come to know that justice in recent times. So, why should mob violence in our case be treated any differently? Pulvati asked. Lee flags warnings on economic woes. So China's premier stressed the need to stabilize the economy as growth is coming under pressure. A meeting from this week convened by China's premier with 1 lakh officials from around the country and described as unprecedented by the official media has underlined growing concern over the state of the world's second largest economy amid continuing COVID-19 lockdown. Second ranked leader Li Keqiang stressed the need to stabilize the economy in the meeting with the growth coming under enormous pressure on account of country's zero COVID policy that remains in place. A number of cities and centers of growth from Beijing to Shanghai remain under varying degrees of lockdown, while logistics chains have also been affected by the stringent measures. The financial capital Shanghai has been under SARS lockdown measures for many weeks, although many have recently been reopened. Mr. Lee, in the international teleconference with officials from around the country, acknowledged difficulties faced in March and April with almost all economic indicators from employment to power consumption and freight transport trending down, while calling for a push to growth. No mention was made of rethinking President Xi Jinping's insistence on following a zero COVID policy, which remains firmly in place in the country. Analysts have said there is little prospect of changing course before the upcoming once in 5 year party congress later this year, when Mr. Xi will begin a third term. The country's zero COVID policy and its relatively low deaths have been flagged as one of Mr. Xi's major legacies, despite the rising economic costs and the rest of the world returning to some form of normalcy. Arranging the restrictions, experts have said, would likely bring tens of thousands of deaths at a politically insensitive time. The authorities are also dealing with low vaccination rates among the elderly, although health officials have admitted that focusing resources on zero COVID has further slowed down vaccination efforts already hindered by hesitancy among older population. Tall order. The State Council or Cabinet, which Mr. Lee heads, has announced close to 3 dozen measures to spur growth and jobs, including new measures bringing the total tax cuts this year to around $400 billion. However, it faces a tall order amid the ongoing COVID-19 curbs. The financial magazine Caixin reported this week that 2 out of 5 logistics companies reported losses in April, according to data from the China Federation of Logistics and Purchasing. The value of imported goods transported by the major firms was down 7.6% year on year, reflecting the disruptions at ports, while the value of industrial goods transported fell 2.9% in April, the first fall since the March 2020 lockdown following the outbreak in Wuhan. The property sector is also in strife, with many developers struggling to make debt payments. The government has pressed the financial institutions to extend repayment periods, and two major developers, China Evergrande and Sunac, said they had recently been given more time to make payments. Caixin reported analysts have said the current curbs are exacting an even greater cost than the first lockdown of 2020, given how the more transmissible Omicron variant has challenged the zero COVID strategy that allowed China to largely escape a major second wave in 2020 and 2021. China also still remains closed to the world, the only major economy that continues to keep in place sweeping travel curbs.